Hello, and welcome to Shopping for Health and the third webinar in our 2021 culinary webinar series for supermarket dietitians. I'm Nancy Pyho. I'm the director of Shopping for Health, and I'm looking forward to talking to everyone today about tree nuts in the kitchen. Discover the unexpected. The sponsor of today's webinar is the International Tree Nut Council's Nutrition Research and Education Foundation. They provided the speakers for today, the presentations, the recipes, and of course, the delicious little sampling packets that all of our participants will receive of a nice little pack of tree nuts. And finally, please note that the Academy is offering continuing education credits for all participants in today's webinar. However, you must be logged on for the entire 90 minutes to receive those. I'll be sending them out in a couple of weeks by email to everyone who completes the webinar today. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Registered dietitian Maureen Turness is the executive director of the International Tree Nut Council's Nutrition Research and Education Foundation. Maureen, I want to thank you so much for sponsoring today's program. Take it away, please.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here today, and we are thrilled to be sponsoring this session on Tree Nuts in the Kitchen, Discover the Unexpected. As Nancy said, I'm Maureen Turness. I'm a dietitian and executive director of the International Tree Nut Council Nutrition Research and Education Foundation, or INC-NREF as we call it, because it's such a mouthful. So before I introduce Sally James, our chef, I wanted to just give you a little bit of background on who we are. So we represent the 9 tree nuts you see here. 6 are grown in the United States, the other 3 are imported. We basically represent everything but peanuts, which grows in the ground. Tree nuts are on shrubs and trees. So here in California, we produce the most almonds, walnuts, and pistachios. The hazelnuts we get in the US are primarily from Oregon, and then pecans are grown in the South. So Arizona, New Mexico, Georgia. And then, of course, people always think of Hawaii with macadamias, but the fact of the matter is we actually get the majority of our macadamias here in the US from Australia and South Africa. And then Brazil nuts are imported from Bolivia, Brazil, and Peru. We get cashews from Brazil, Vietnam, and Mozambique. And then pine nuts come from a number of different countries, including China, Russia, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Turkey, and Mongolia. And as many of you may know, you can get 2 different forms of pine nuts. The Mediterranean Italian is more of the elongated pine nut, and then the Chinese is more of a squat triangle, if you will. But you can find both of them. So why did our organization form? Well, as many of you may recall, in the late 80s, early 90s, people were very fat phobic. And at that time, in the late 80s, I was working as a clinical dietitian in a hospital working with cardiac patients, and the top of the list of foods to avoid were nuts. So the nut groups here in the United States felt like they had to do something about this bad image of nuts. People loved the taste, but there wasn't much to say from a health standpoint. And in fact, in '93, there was one study that was published out of Loma Linda University. Was published in the New England Journal of Medicine on walnuts and heart disease. But beyond that, there really wasn't much. So in 1995, we held a meeting in San Francisco at the Presidio with USDA. And the purpose of that meeting was to basically pull together a handful of nutrition researchers to try and encourage them to think about what they could do with nuts. And Janet King, some of you may recognize that name. She's a leading nutrition researcher and worked both at UC Davis and UC Berkeley. She chaired that meeting. And as I say, just pulled together a handful of researchers, including Chris Etherton from Penn State, to get them basically thinking about what they might look at with nuts and health. Well, after that meeting, there was a lot of research done, particularly in the area of nuts and heart disease. So much so that in 2002, we were able to go to FDA with a petition for a health claim for nuts and heart disease. And then in 2003, they announced one of the first qualified health claims on nuts and heart disease, which I'm sure many of you seen on packaging. Scientific evidence suggests but does not prove that eating 1.5 ounces per day of most nuts is part of a diet low in saturated fat and cholesterol. may reduce the risk of heart disease. So this was a big turning point for us. We finally had something positive, we could say, regarding health and nuts. So then in 2007, we decided to do a follow-up to the Presidio meeting, and this was again with USDA, but this time over the course of 12 years, so much research had been done that we had 25 researchers from around the world sitting around a table, all of whom had published nutrition research with nuts. And we asked them to come to some sort of consensus on the state of the science for nuts and health, and even more importantly, to basically go over with us what were the research gaps and where should we be putting our funding moving forward. And I also want to point out INC NREF funds research, but as I'm sure you all know, the individual nut boards do more research than we do. They have bigger budgets. We focus on mixed nut research, and then they do their own individual research. But out of this meeting came a number of different recommended priority areas, including heart disease, weight, diabetes, phytochemicals, and cancer, and then even healthy diet. How do nuts fit into a healthy diet, especially like with the dietary guidelines? So these priorities essentially became a roadmap for us for the next decade, and that's what we focused on in funding our research. So to date, we've had 24 studies published, and you can see the range of topics here. Our all-cause mortality study, some of you may be familiar with. This was conducted at Harvard in 2013, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, which got a lot of coverage, but we've also funded research with cancer, diabetes, metabolic syndrome, weight. And so what I want to do today is I'm going to be talking a little bit about tree nut research, and I'm also going to give you some information on nut resources, talk about our new website, and hopefully things that'll be helpful to you as well as your clients and customers. And then our chef, Sally James, is going to be giving you some great recipe ideas with tree nuts, and then also some great tips on how to incorporate them into the diet, as well as some gift ideas since we have the holidays around the corner. So now I'd love to introduce you to Sally James. Sally and I have worked together for many years. In fact, she used to represent Australian macadamias on our board. She does the majority of our mixed nut recipes. She also, when I talk later about our website, you'll see she does our blog on the website. So she's an award-winning Australian author, educator, chef, and television presenter whose books and recipes have won international acclaim for food and wine pairing, health, and creativity. She's the author of 18 cookbooks and publications, including her best-selling Simply Healthy, winner of the prestigious World Cookbook Award. And she's been a guest presenter on both the Food Network and UPN networks. She's also been featured in magazines like Cooking Light, Wine Spectator, Fitness, Family Circle, and she's been a guest chef and lecturer at venues such as the American Heart Association, the Culinary Institute of America, and Disney's Epcot International Food and Wine Festival. So with that, I want to hand this over to Sally.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity. It's really exciting for me. One, because I've really spent my whole career devoted to making healthy eating more appealing to people. I worked for 10 years with the Heart Foundation in Australia, and the greatest problem I saw was that people would come away from hospital or from their doctors and they'd be so depressed about what they were going to eat. And so it made it my mission to make sure that they got up every morning and they were going to be excited about what they were going to eat. And so, you know, I just searched and searched to find ways of making healthier eating more entertaining to fit different people's taste buds. And nuts just fitted everything, because not only do they taste great, I mean, there's always nuts that someone is going to have as a favorite, but they add great flavor, they add great texture, and they have so many functional uses in recipes. And what I've tried to do in this 90-minute segment that we have is introduce some different ideas for using nuts in cooking that adds interest, a bit of fun, and maybe turns this first one I'm going to do, it's really an illustration of how you can turn what would be a side dish into a main dish because of the protein and the other minerals and vitamins and fats and nutrients that they will add to the product. So, and also coming up to Hanukkah, I thought it's a good one to do because it's a lovely sort of Jewish traditional recipe, and that is some latkes. Without further ado, what I've got in here is a mound of grated sweet potatoes of various colors. Normally latkes would be made with, you know, your choice of white potato, and they would, you know, you'd squeeze them and quite a bit of moisture would come out. With these ones, as you'll see when I pour them into the pan here, that, you know, we've got a lovely mixture, so it's very festive looking. We've got some nice of the yellow, the golden sweet potato or kumara, the lovely red one and the white one. So it makes for a really colorful experience. One of my mottos is every color with every meal, because color brings not only a visual delight, but also it brings nutrients. There's always color. Where there's color, there's going to be nutrition. Okay, so now we're adding some fresh herbs into the mix. Some grated onion. I've got red onion, but you could use leek, you could use any kind of onion you like. And then some nuts of your choice. I've actually got every nut in this, so you've chopped finely or as fine as you want, really. I mean, it's one of those recipes that you can make it up as you go along. Then we've got some flour. If you want to make these gluten-free, you could quite easily use a buckwheat or a rice flour, but I've just got rice flour, normal flour that I've seasoned. Okay, so we just mix these up till they're well combined. And then we add our eggs. So you'll have the recipe. Again, you can make, if you want these more pancakey, you can add more flour and more eggs, or if you want them just more pure vegetable, then you can use less. It's one of those recipes that you really can just make it suit your own taste. You could even put grated squash in these as well. I was going to do that and I realized, oh, I'm making a squash soup. That's a little too much squash for comfort. So when these are well mixed together, we get our oil heating in the fry pan. So I'm using a grapeseed oil because it's got a very high smoke point and it's a really healthy oil. But if you want the flavor of an extra virgin olive oil, that's wonderful too. I often do use that. So we'll get the oil. So we're getting the oil nice and hot in our pan. And then we're just going to place mounds in the oil and then press it down with our hands. Right, so they're going to go and sizzle away there. In the meantime, I'm going to talk about what I'm going to put with these. So I've got here a, you know, one of the things about, another thing of nuts that I love is I love eating the Mediterranean way. And they use nuts in so many of their just natural cooking items. Think of pesto, which is mostly pine nuts, but you can make a lovely, say, a almond and arugula pesto, which is really beautiful. There's so many different options for that. They often put pistachios, they puree them up into a paste and spread those on pizza instead of cheese. So it's wonderful how nuts are so intrinsic in the Mediterranean way of eating. This, what I have, is one that's not quite as well known. It's a romesco sauce, which is basically a nice, rich, kind of spicy sauce. You've roasted peppers, red peppers, you've roasted tomato, you've roasted red onion all together in a pan. You put it in a blender with some olive oil, some bread cubes and some traditionally almonds, and blended that up to a nice paste. So it really gives a nice bite to the pancakes. So if we go over to have a look at our pancakes, I'll just show you a flip, but I have pre-made some. Let's need a little more. So I'll bring our pre-cooked ones that I've done before over to the table so we can do a bit of a plating and get on to our accompaniment. Here are these beautiful. What you do normally is when you make a few you would put them on a paper lined tray such as this and just put it in a very warm oven so they stay hot while you cook the remainder. I had a last minute idea while I was actually getting my ingredients together, so I'm going to just add a new component to the recipe because I thought it would be really lovely. And another thing I love cooking with is yogurt. So I've actually just got some sheep's milk yogurt here and let that go on top of them. And then our romesco sauce.
Sally, sorry, it's Maureen. Did I miss it? Did you say, can you substitute any nuts you want into this recipe?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I use every nut pretty much. I think I've got a mixture in this one. I've got a mixture of walnuts, pistachios, pecans, almonds, hazelnuts and macadamias, but you could use just one. You could use just walnuts, or you could really, it's one of those recipes, you know, there are some recipes that only certain nuts fit in because of their texture and flavor, but this is one of those recipes where across the board any nuts could work at all. So let's give these final ones a flip, but I think everyone's got the idea of what's going on. There we go, that one's a bit browner. There we go. Okay, so we'll take these off the heat. So we're going to get on to our next recipe, which is one that I was inspired by Asian style cooking. In Australia, we have a lot of Asian influence compared to Latino influence that you get here in the USA. And it's also inspired by the French kind of lardon salads with frisée. So I'm going to do a warm dressing. Well, I've got a mixture of nuts here. I've actually just got walnuts and sliced almonds because I think they'll do a nice contrast of texture. And you just put them into a pan and put that pan over the heat until they just start to get brown and aromatic. So we'll do that now. Okay, so here we've got a beautiful bowl of frisée lettuce that I put some chives in. And it's really the components of a classic French salad. It would be beautiful with a poached egg on top as well, but I think we've got enough happening in this meal without that. So we shake the pan just while the nuts are cooking, just until the pan gets nice and hot. And while that's happening, I've got the dressing already in a jar. So here I've got red wine vinegar, olive oil, lemon juice, and some Dijon mustard, and just seasoned to taste with a little kosher salt and cracked pepper. So you give that a good shake.
Sally, it's Maureen again. We've got a couple questions in the chat, and I thought this might be a good time. How do you keep the nuts from burning when you're toasting them?
Keep an eye on them. Really, there's no magic secret there. You just don't walk away for a long time and go and have a chat on the phone. You actually really have to keep an eye on them, or you just put it on a really low heat, or you could do it in the oven, but it doesn't produce the same effect. So
what about the microwave? Someone was wondering if you could microwave them to toast them.
Oh, absolutely. Microwaving is a great way of toasting them. You just got to be really careful because they cook from the inside when you microwave them. So often you don't realize that they're actually burning on the inside because you can't see it on the outside. So, but microwaving is a great quick way of toasting nuts, but it wouldn't really work for this recipe because you need a hot pan.
Okay.
I think we have a hot pan now. So we're going to do the drama effect and pour in the and we just let it sizzle a bit, let the dressing absorb those gorgeous flavors of the nuts. Let the nuts take on a bit of the flavor of the dressing. And then we just pour it over our salad. Okay. So you're going to slightly wilt the greens. So you don't have to use frisée, but frisée is one that holds up really well. You could use curly endive or radicchio. Once you get into lettuces like butter lettuce, you can do it, but they tend to wilt a little too much. So Frisee is a perfect one. I'm sorry. I wish they would invent an aromatic television so you could get the smells that I'm getting coming from this. Okay, so we just spoon this onto the side of our plate. There's lunch, ladies. That's our lovely pancake pile and our frisee. I've got 1 minute left to go, I'm noticing on my clock. So I am going to put a quick start so I can actually do real life on the next one, because it's one of the most exciting dishes that I'm partial to. And that's my, I would say pumpkin and macadamia nut soup, but you would say squash. I love using kabocha squash because it's got so much color and depth and flavor, but you could use butternut. Problem is with butternut that I find is you don't really know what they're like until you chop into them, because they could be pale and you never really know. And with this kind of soup, you want it to be a nice bright orange squash pumpkin. Same thing for us. Sorry about that. So what we're doing, let me bring this pan to you so you can see what's going on in here. We've got some gorgeous kabocha squash. I'll show it to you here. Some lovely kabocha squash. We've got macadamias, we've got onions and apple and some ginger. And we're going to saute that until it's just slightly golden. And then to that mixture, I'm going to add some coconut milk and some chicken stock. And that will be simmering away while Maureen does her presentation. And when you come back to me, we will pop it in the blender, and I wish you could taste it, but anyway, back to you, Maureen.
Thank you. Well, before you sign off, we do have a question. Could you use frozen butternut or fresh cut up butternut squash for this recipe?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can buy those big bags of cut up, and that's a good way because then you get to see the color. Because
okay.
It's a bag. Yeah, frozen. What I would do if you were using frozen is I would add it at the same time as the liquid. I wouldn't bother sauteing it first, because that will then the water will leach out of it and it won't, it'll affect the texture of the ingredients. So, but absolutely.
Okay, and I guess she meant actually, how you can buy the bags of the pre-cut butternut squash, so you can use that too. Right?
Yeah, that's very time saving. I mean, it's hard work skinning a pumpkin. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
well, that looks wonderful, Sally. Thank you. So now I want to talk a little bit, we'll change gears here, and I want to, whoops, I'm having an issue again on my, here we go. Talk a little bit about the research on nuts, and particularly I want to start with nuts and weight, because we actually just had a study published in May. This was out of UCLA with Dr. Xiaoping Li and colleagues, and this was published in Nutrients. And they looked at the effect of mixed tree nut snacks compared to a refined carbohydrate snack, which is pretzels, on both weight loss and weight maintenance. So there were 95 overweight obese subjects who actually completed the study. And they looked at 1.5 ounces of tree nuts versus the caloric equivalent in pretzels. Everyone followed 3 months of a weight loss plan, which was 500 calories less than resting metabolic rate, followed by 3 months of an isocaloric weight maintenance plan. And what they found is that both groups lost a significant amount of weight. They had a significant decrease in BMI. However, satiety was significantly higher in the tree nut group after 6 months compared to the pretzel group. There was a trend toward greater weight maintenance in the tree nut group compared to the pretzel group, and the dropout rate was significantly lower in the tree nut group at 16% versus 36% in the pretzel group. In addition, heart rate was significantly decreased in the tree nut group compared to baseline, but not in the pretzel group. So obviously we were very happy with these results. I mean, I'm sure many of you often get comments or questions, I do, about, can you even include nuts? They're high in fat, they're high in calories in any kind of weight control plan. And yes, you can, and that's what this is showing. A month after that study was published, there was a systematic review and meta-analysis published in Obesity Reviews in June, this past June, answering the question, are fatty nuts a weighty concern? So in this meta-analysis, they looked at 6 prospective cohort studies and 86 randomized controlled trials. And after all the analyses, the bottom line was current evidence suggests that nut consumption does not lead to increased adiposity. Both health professionals and dietary guidelines may recommend nuts for those without allergies for their cardiometabolic benefits without stipulations or concern of an adverse effect on weight control. So just more support for the fact that yes, nuts can and should be included in any kind of weight control plan. And I want to mention here too, because I mentioned back earlier that a lot of the early research that was done on nuts, and really still today, our biggest amount of research has to do with nuts and heart disease. Well, when they were doing those studies, in a lot of the cases, subjects were getting as much as 600 calories a day in nuts, but they weren't seeing the corresponding weight gain that you would expect. So that's what kind of got researchers interested in looking into this further. And they've come up with a number of reasons, possible reasons, nuts don't seem to lead to weight gain. So the three I've listed here, the first is satiety value of nuts. We know nuts have protein, fat, fiber, all of these things are satiating. And in fact, Xiaoping Li, the researcher at UCLA that did our weight study, feels very strongly that it was the satiety value of nuts that probably helped people maintain their weight much better than the pretzel group, and was probably one of the major reasons there were fewer people dropping out in the nut group versus the pretzel group, because they were feeling full, they weren't hungry. Another possible reason is incomplete fat absorption. A number of researchers, including Rick Mattis at Purdue, have looked at this, and what they have found is that nuts, particularly like the hard ones like almonds, basically, if you don't chew them well, not that people are choking on nuts, but if you're not chewing them all the way and swallowing, chunks of the nut are basically going through you, and therefore you're not absorbing all of the fat. And then the last theory is that nuts are actually less caloric than originally thought. And there have been a number of studies. In fact, they've looked at cashews, almonds, walnuts, and pistachios so far. The majority of the research has been done by David Baer at USDA. And we all know from our nutrition days, the Atwater method to analyze foods for their caloric value. I mean, that's over 100 years old. There are newer methodologies. And so what they've done is they've gone back and they've reanalyzed, in this case, these 4 nuts. And the 4 nuts are actually anywhere from 5 to 25% less, have less calories than what we've originally thought. And a lot of it has to do with the structure of the plant wall. So the feeling is they're probably going to find, the more they do of this, is that it's not just nuts, it's other plant foods that may in fact be lower in calories as well than what we originally thought. So it's interesting to see. I mean, they don't know for sure, but these are all potential reasons why we're not seeing the expected weight gain. Well, during the time that this research had been published, there was also a study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association looking at weight gain in the pandemic. And what they found is that the average weight gain while people were sheltering in place in the US was 1.5 pounds per month. So, I mean, some people were gaining, 29, 30 pounds while sheltering in place. Why? Well, it's not surprising. 2 main reasons. 1, lack of exercise. People weren't moving, they weren't doing much, doing their normal exercise routine. And then 2, increased snacking. I mean, we all know the stories about people using sourdough starters and families baking in the kitchen because everyone was home. So it's not surprising people were gaining weight. Well, we know even before the pandemic that most Americans have been getting 25% of their calories from snacks every day. And the large proportion of those come from desserts, sugar sweetened beverages, sweets, and salty snacks. So if we could substitute just one of those snacks with 1.5 ounces of tree nuts, we could potentially have a big impact on weight and overall health. Now, yes, we all know nuts are more expensive than pretzels and chips, that kind of thing. But what I always try to explain to people is the idea of nutrient density. Tree nuts have the protein, the fiber, the healthy fats. They also have important vitamins and minerals, phytochemicals, things that you're not going to find in pretzels, chips, and other snacks like that. And therefore, I mean, if you look at it this way, you only need 1.5 ounces of tree nuts a day. That's a third of a cup. It's not that much to get the health benefits. And so if you look at nutrients per dollar, you're actually getting more bang for the buck with the nuts than you are the other snacks. And they'll keep you full longer, so you don't have to eat as much. So this has been one of our major message points we've been trying to get out to people, that if you, like most people, are going to snack throughout the day, at least try and make one of those snacks tree nuts. So now I want to talk a little bit about diabetes, which is another area that has been researched with nuts. So back in 2010, the University of Toronto did one of the largest studies to date on nuts and diabetes, looking at 117 type 2 diabetic subjects who were not on insulin, and they were randomized to one of 3 treatments. So they either got 2 ounces of mixed nuts, healthy muffin control, or half portions of each. And what they found is that A1C levels were reduced and lipid profiles improved with, again, no weight gain for the nuts only group. Well, fast forward for a few years, and in 2018, the same researchers did a reanalysis of that trial and looked at additional items as well. And the new study reconfirmed the reduction in A1C, but it also demonstrated the potential effect of nut consumption in reducing ApoB and small LDL cholesterol, which we know both of those are risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So just another reason, growing body of evidence that yes, including nuts in a healthy diet can certainly give you some good health benefits. And this is works for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes as well, I should state. So the other study I wanted to talk about actually has not been published yet. We have been involved with the MIND study for the last 5 years. This is an NIH-funded study. And I don't know how many, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the MIND diet. It's a combination of the Mediterranean and DASH diet. So in the MIND study, they've been looking at the role of the MIND diet to prevent dementia in older individuals and possibly reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. So the study took place at Harvard and Rush University in Chicago. The primary aim was to test the effects of the MIND diet plus a mild weight loss diet versus a usual diet and a mild weight loss diet on cognitive decline. So there were 600 participants. So half were getting the MIND diet, half the usual diet. And those getting the MIND diet, or following the MIND diet rather, were given a number of foods. So they received mixed nuts. We actually worked with the Peanut Institute here in the US and did a combination snack pack of tree nuts and peanuts. And then in addition to that, they were receiving blueberries, olive oil, and water. And what's interesting about this study is that the researchers were looking at the effect of a dietary pattern rather than the effect of specific foods. So as I mentioned, this was a 5-year study. The intervention is finished. The researchers are now sending reports to NIH to get their feedback. And we're hoping, fingers crossed, to see a manuscript submitted, maybe published next year in 2022, which would be very exciting because this is a huge study and everyone is interested to see the results. Now, what's interesting is the same researchers are starting a second study, which we're involved with, which will begin by October 1st, in the next couple of weeks here. And this time, they've got 500 participants. Half, again, will follow the MIND study. Half will be on the usual diet. But the difference is these are people who have suffered a stroke and have been discharged home. So it's a 3-year study funded by the National Institutes on Aging. And as I say, they'll get the same types of foods. And what the researchers are hoping is that when this study is complete, assuming they get the findings they're hoping for from both the MIND study and the new one, which is called the Nourish study, that they'll be able to say, yeah, consuming a MIND diet will help you decrease your risk for cognitive decline and potentially Alzheimer's, both before and after a stroke. Because we know when you have a stroke, that can increase your risk for cognitive decline as well. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. As I say, that second one we won't have results for a while because it's a 3-year study. So now I want to look more closely at nuts themselves. And I can't really see any of you. I'd say show me a show of hands. How many of you, I'm assuming a lot, get the question, is one nut better than another? Or what's the best nut? Because I get those questions all the time. And this is a perfect example of the fact that yes, nuts are very similar. They all have, they're high in unsaturated fats. They have the protein, the fiber, phytochemicals, important vitamins and minerals, but they each have their own special attributes as well, which you can see here. So for example, almonds and hazelnuts are very high in vitamin E. One Brazil nut gives you all the selenium you need per day. Cashews are rich in magnesium. They're also one of the lowest in total calories. Macadamias are an excellent source of manganese. They're also the highest in monounsaturated fat. Pecans are high in total flavonoids. Pine nuts high in copper. And then pistachios are a great source of plant sterols. They are also, like cashews, those two are really the lowest in total calories. And then lastly, walnuts, an excellent source of omega-3. And I always like to bring up the fact that there's so many articles that get written about, nuts are a great source of omega-3. Well, only walnuts are. The others are not. Pecans have a little bit, but it's not that much. So if you're talking about omega-3 fatty acids, you're only talking about walnuts. And the other thing I always like to point out is, to people is to choose your favorites and eat a mixture, because all of these things, all of the nuts, as I say, have their own special attributes. But also look at your diet. If you don't eat fish, maybe you want to eat walnuts. If your diet is low in vitamin E, maybe you look to add almonds and hazelnuts. But a mixture, I think, is the best bet. And then lastly here, I did want to talk about tree nut allergies, because I'm assuming all of you get questions, and if your experience is like mine, I'd say like in the last 5 to 6 years, I've had so many more questions on food allergies, and we know food allergies have increased dramatically. One of the major theories, which will be interesting to see what happens after the pandemic, because one of the major theories is people have been so kind of dirt phobic and everyone's so clean using the Purell. So it'll be interesting to see what happens now that we've all literally been germ phobic and using Purell morning, noon, and night. So it's definitely gone up. And then ironically, even though I've been working with the tree nut industry since '97, I actually have a daughter who's allergic to nuts. So my 16-year-old daughter was diagnosed at the age of 5 as being allergic to both almonds to everything but almonds and peanuts. And we carry the EpiPens. But that brings up an important point too, because a lot of people don't realize it's extremely individual. If you're allergic to peanuts, you're not necessarily allergic to tree nuts, and vice versa. If you're allergic to one tree nut, you're not necessarily allergic to other tree nuts. The one thing we can say, we actually did research at UC Davis a number of years ago. People who are allergic to walnuts are very often allergic to pecans and vice versa. Same thing with cashews and pistachios. The reason being, pecans and walnuts are in the same plant family, and so are cashews and pistachios. So if you get questions, if you don't do this already, I highly recommend you refer people to FARE, which is the Food Allergy Research and Education. FARE is kind of the end all on food allergies. Their advisory board is literally like a who's who of allergy researchers. So their website is foodallergy.org. That's where I refer everyone. They have great consumer material, recipes, things like that. So we actually asked them to do a fact sheet for us on tree nut allergy. So you just see the front of it here, where it's talking about what's a food allergy in general, what are the symptoms, that kind of thing. On the back side talks about tree nuts. Where do you find tree nuts? How do you read a label to avoid them? So this handout is actually available on our website and people can download it, and I'll be talking about that later. But I think this is a great resource for people. And one of the things that's been interesting lately, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the LEAP study. This was the early intervention with peanut study that was done over in the UK. And the study was so effective. They were giving small amounts of peanut to infants. And it was so effective that they stopped the study. And now you have the American Academy of Pediatrics recommending early introduction of peanuts. You also have, as we all know, in the last dietary guidelines 2020, they now recommend early introduction of peanuts to avoid allergy later. Unfortunately, at this point, we can't say the same about tree nuts. We haven't done the research, but we're actually in discussions with the same researchers who want to do the same thing with tree nuts, which would be great, because that's actually a positive thing you can talk about with tree nuts, that starting early, if you could potentially not only reduce the risk for allergies later or reduce the severity, would be fantastic. So again, this is available on our website, and I'll show more about that when I get back. But right now, I'd like to turn it back to Sally, who's going to give you some great tips on working with nuts in the kitchen and some good gift ideas for the holidays. So I'll hand it over to you, Sally.
Maureen, sorry, it's Nancy. Before you do,
Sure.
a couple of good questions that I think would be appropriate to answer right now before we switch back to Sally.
Sure.
Could you speak to something about the amino acid profile, particularly lysine in nuts? Do you get questions about that, and what would be your comment on that?
So I guess I'm not quite sure. All of the nuts are great sources of protein. Pistachios have been analyzed, and they're the one nut that you can actually call a whole protein. We do have information on our website with a breakdown, so you can see which amino acids are in which nut. And I would refer you to that. And when I walk through the website, I can show you that information.
Yes, thank you. That would be good. And several people have commented how much they liked your slide on the various benefits of the various nuts. Is that something that's available on your website again? Would you just
Yes, the one where I showed the attribute for each nut, that's actually a handout we have on the website that you can download and print.
Okay, very good. Okay.
Yeah.
And just one other quick question that just came in about oral immunotherapy as an option for people with allergies. Is that anything that you can comment on, or is that fall under the category of allergy research are still conducting on tree nuts?
Well, we have not done that, but I know it can be very effective. I know some areas, there are some institutes that are doing a little bit with tree nuts. We don't have any formal research for oral immunotherapy with tree nuts specifically, but I do know a lot of people are doing it with peanuts and with other foods. We just have not done any kind of formal research yet with tree nuts.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
So Sally, are you?
I am here.
Back to the kitchen.
There we go. So let me just take you back to what I did. It's a soup that really draws on my Australian roots, and you could really adapt it. I can see it's still a bit blurry. Let me just give that another wipe. Got steamed up. So you could use any kind of squash at all, but what I'm illustrating is how great nuts are as a thickening agent. Now, it's not just in soups, but you could also use it in casseroles, and instead of needing to make a roux, flour, butter and the like, and that to thicken up your casseroles, you can simply incorporate nuts into the base. Like if you were doing a casserole, you could saute nuts in the base, the celery and the carrot and the onions, and then scoop some of that out and make a puree of it, and that will naturally thicken your soup. There are some nuts that are better at doing that, the ones that have a more creamier texture. I mean, cashews and macadamias, almonds, hazelnuts, they're all quite good at that. And but this one, really, I've got the ginger going with the kabocha squash I've used, but you could use other squashes, and onions and a bit of apple to give it some sweetness. So they're cooking away. I've added coconut milk to play on the ginger. You could also add sometimes I'll squeeze a bit of lime on at the end. But while that's going, we're going to move on to another idea with nuts. And right now, while most of my life has been put on hold with COVID, I've been working at a little restaurant up in the Yakima Canyon, and it's been interesting to see how popular some of the recipes I've been doing are with the fly fishing people and the customers there, and a lot of them are based on nuts. And one of them is an Italian amaretti. I don't know if any of you have used that, but it's basically like a nut shortbread, but the nuts are what gives it the shortness. So it depends on what's, I love doing this with hazelnuts and pistachios and almonds. The Italians would probably scoff at me and say, no, you should use one or the other, not all of them together, but I'm playful, I'm Australian, I can't help myself. So it's so simple. All you do, I've used actually, you could put the almonds in the blender and it'd give you a crunchier texture, but I like to use a bit of almond flour to give it a little more smoothness. But with the pistachios and the hazelnuts, we simply put them in a blender. And it's really up to you how fine you want them to be ground. So don't go too far or you might turn them into paste, and we're moving on to that next. So you see how ground they are there, quite nice and fine. So we're going to add that to the almond flour. Again, it's one of those recipes that I've given you a recipe, but you don't really need it. We add about enough, I was going to say icing sugar, confectioner's sugar, about a half the amount of confectioner's sugar as there are nuts. And I've got some grated orange zest and Gran Marnier in there. It's also wonderful with amaretto liqueur or Cointreau, just to give it a bit of a spike. And then, where's my egg whites? Oh, here they are. Some egg whites. And we mix those up just until it comes together. And again, it's one of the healthiest kind of snacks you can really have, because it's just nuts, a bit of sugar and an egg whites and whatever flavoring you want to use to it. So what you do with these is you simply, where's my baking tray? You simply roll them into little balls, and then, oops, I used up all my icing sugar. You could roll them in icing sugar. And let me go straight to the end result here to make things easier. And this is another great gift idea. There you go, decorate them nicely, but that's how they turn out. They're nice and short and crisp and very rustic in their essence and how they come together. So there's one Christmas idea for you, or holiday idea, or just something to snack on for the kids and everyone else. So there you go, that's my amaretti. Okay, the next recipe I'm moving on to is one of my favorite Christmas gift ideas, because it's so different. And I discovered this when I was trying to eat less chocolate, and I found these nuts that were, I've never seen them since, but they were dusted in a sweet sugary mixture, and they had mint, and so they were just these mint dusted almonds, and they were just beautiful. So I played around and played around and played around until I figured it out. Well, I figured my idea out. So it's so simple. What you do is you put into a Ziploc bag a mixture of cornstarch and confectioner's sugar, and then you get some peppermint essence. Or you could, play around with a few other essences that you might like, and just put in a couple of drops, mix it around, and then just taste it to see. A bit more. Depends how minty you like it. And then just toss it. And be careful though, because if you get pure mint oil, you won't want to use too much, but peppermint essence, you use a little bit more. Okay, so that's ready and waiting. Now, what I have, I've already heated up some honey and got that so it's nice and runny honey. There you go. I've got some almonds and nuts. Now, ideally, you would have these roasted straight out of the oven and throw them straight into here so they're warm. But I've pre-roasted these, and I'm going to put them into the hot honey. Okay, we get these well coated. Okay, so they're nicely coated. Then we get a sieve. And put that over a bowl, important point. Okay, and we just pour the nuts into there. And it's interesting, you can actually, don't throw away the honey that has come out, because it really does develop some of the nutty flavor, and it's wonderful spread on toast with the nut butter that I'm about to show you how to make. Okay, so then we tip these straight into our nut mixture. Honey nicely drained off. Okay, and then we simply seal it over so we don't let the kitchen be the one wearing all the icing sugar and the cornstarch, and we just give it a really nice shake until all the nuts are coated. You might want to sort of push it a bit with your fingers so they're really well coated. And then we get a separate sieve. It is a little bit of a messy one to make, but it's so worth it, I promise you. They're really lovely. Okay, we'll transfer this and bring in our other pan. I'm going to multi-purpose my assistant here and ask her to hold this while I tip this mixture into here. Okay. Now we just give this a shake. If any of the nuts have stuck together with the honey, you just work them through the sugar.
Sally, how long can you keep something like this? I mean, if you're going to give it to someone as a gift, for example.
Oh, this would keep for a couple of months easily. Just put it in a nice sealed jar. Jane, can you pass me the jar that we've already got that in? Or it may be somewhere around. I have my little gift idea already. Let me go and get it. We'll just leave me for a second.
I was just curious if you could make it ahead and to give to people without worrying about it.
No, so here we go in a nice Ziploc jar, and these will easily keep for a few months. So
Oh, okay.
I wouldn't really recommend putting, I mean, normally I would recommend putting nuts in the fridge, but I wouldn't really do it for these because then it would make it go a bit gluggy. But you know,
Right.
these you could easily make them, and the longer you keep them, you know, say for a few weeks at least, then the peppermint flavor will infuse through the nuts. So it's a really
okay.
nice way to do it. So yeah, so there are our minted nuts. So we'll just get that out the way. So I'll make sure I don't go past my time. Oh, I've got 5 minutes. Right. Okay, so we're going to duck onto nut butter now. And it's really just a matter of, let me see, I'm going to take my pick here. I might do some pecans, make sure this is down.
And Sally, while you're doing that, there was a question. I know I'll be talking about storage, but any other buying tips on nuts? Like when you're buying them, what do you look for?
You know, I would, you know, it's hard when you're buying them. I mean, definitely look for the use by date, but with freshness, often it comes with aroma. So if you're buying bulk nuts, you can, you know, have a bit of a sniff, but really, if you're purchasing nuts, you know, I'd look that there's not too much oily residue or signs that they've been stored for too long. And, you know, I wouldn't, sometimes, you know, if they're on the top shelf that gets in a supermarket that gets really warm, I'd be cautious of that. But it's really just watching the use by date and making sure that you don't. And as soon as you get them home, storing them in the fridge or the freezer so they maintain a longer life. So we're going to do a mixed nut butter here. Now, in making your own nut butter, there are many variables. One is depending on what kind of blender you use. If you use one of those high-powered ones that has the plunger, they're going to turn to paste like that, pretty much no matter what nut you use. If you use a food processor, you'll probably need to incorporate a bit of oil depending on the nut you use. If you use a macadamia, because they've got a higher oil content, they're more likely to come to a paste. But let's experiment here. I've put a mixture in, so it's really a matter of pulsing on and off. Okay, it is starting to form a little bit of a paste. You want to come over here and see around the edges, you'll see that, but I'm going to incorporate a little oil. You could use a nut oil that echoes whatever nut is in there, but I actually really like it with a bit of extra virgin olive oil because that adds a nice fruitiness to it. Or actually, how about a bit of truffle oil? That'd be a nice one. So just add a little oil, and it's really just one you have to feel as you go. Okay. Together. Okay, we're nearly there. A bit more oil. There goes the Grand Marnier. Oh well, lucky I put the lid on. Okay, one more. You could even put honey in this and just have, you know, how you have a nut and honey mixture. Great. Okay. Now I'm not going to have time to actually show you pureeing the soup. So fortunately, I had some pre-made. So here we go. Look at that beautiful, lush pumpkin soup. Now the perfect accompaniment for that for your kids' dinner when they get home after their sports game is to get some lovely nut butter.
Sally, we had a question. When you do the nut butter, should you use unsalted nuts?
And I think it's up to your taste. You know, the jury's pretty out about the health of salt, but roasted nuts can often form a paste better than raw nuts. And if you like a saltier flavor, I mean, I'm not going to judge anyone if they put that in there, but it really depends. I mean, some people just don't like unsalted butter, but there we are. Look at that lovely butter, and
It looks very yummy.
oh, it fell in. Right, okay. That's the end idea. It's, you know, that's sort of what you do, you know. It's delicious.
Perfect. Well, and of course, now I'm going to ask you while you're eating, how long can you keep the nut butter? How long can you store it? And do you have to worry about it turning rancid?
Yes, with any nut storage and, you know, a food that's high in oil content, again, it's one that I would store in the fridge. 3 to 4 months is going to be just fine, but provided that your nuts were fresh in the first place.
Okay.
So the important thing is to, that was really delicious, actually, that butter and the, so, and it's really a, you know, complete protein, you know, nice vegetable mix. But yeah, store it in the fridge. If you've got nice fresh nuts, 3 months is absolutely fine, just like you would if a store-bought nut butter. So
Okay.
I think have I gone past my time?
No, you're good. I actually have one more question for you.
Oh, yeah.
You have, I know we didn't have time today, but you have your wonderful macadamia shortbread cookies that I was hoping maybe you could just give everyone a little tip on that.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I don't want to sort of be partial to one nut, but when it comes to making shortbread, macadamias are like butter. They're quite amazing. You don't need to use butter. And I tested this out on I was giving a talk to a Rotary group in Tasmania once with the Heart Foundation, and I made a wedge of shortbread totally with macadamias. All you do is you process the macadamias with the flour, and then put in maybe a little skim milk or just something to bind it together. It could be an egg white, and you bake them as though you'd bake shortbread, and you don't need to add any butter whatsoever. And it's short, and it's, you know, slightly sweet, and got that, you know, because macadamia isn't a strong flavor, it's just lovely and sweet and decadent. And not that I've got anything against butter, but you know, if you do want to eat less saturated fat, then, you know, it's one of those things you can do. And we do have that on the website. And I did want to mention too that if you wanted a gift idea, we incorporated the nuts and the mint sugar coating that I did a little more decadent. I do have a recipe from a chef that is on the our website blog that's under, is it Easter recipes, Maureen?
Yes, it's under Easter. Yeah.
Yeah. So
and you have and there's Well, and I'll show everyone too in a minute on your blogs, because you have a lot of great information on different recipe ideas, different ways to flavor nuts, things like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, flavoring nuts is fun. You know, you can think, or chili roasted, you know, honey coated. I mean, it's great. You know, to me, it just makes, because I'm really aware of, you know, giving things that are healthy a really nice twist to make them more appealing to kids or people that just say, oh, I don't eat healthy food, you know, those people. And it's just, there's so much, they're so versatile, because, you know, look, it's sort of like seafood. I think seafood's wonderful too, because you can eat seafood every day and it's a different experience. The same with nuts, you know, you can do something different with them. And there's so much variety, and, you know, as Maureen pointed out, so many different nutrients that are contributing from each different nut. So they're an absolute joy to me.
And what about like fish? Are there certain nuts, or do you think it's the same thing? Are certain nuts better with certain types of fish, or is it a personal thing?
To me, it's the dish. I mean, for example, if you were doing a lovely nut crust on a piece of halibut or salmon, I would probably go with almonds or hazelnuts. If you were doing like a sang choy bao or a stir fry, I would probably go with cashews or macadamias. So it just depends on really the dish you're making, and your own flavor preference.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is great. Thank you so much, Sally.
Yeah, sorry about putting that little accident there. That's rude, isn't it?
Well, I think we have a couple minutes if there are any other questions in the chat on this.
Okay, yeah, talking about how crushed up nuts are a good substitute for breadcrumbs. Leah talks about giving them as gifts at holiday time, spice nuts as gifts, usually pecans, but as we know, others would work too. So yeah, lot of creative, good ideas here on ways to use nuts. And again, I know you're going to talk about this, but just put out a quick note that a lot of this is also on your website. A lot of resource materials on how to talk to consumers about what they can do with nuts.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's great. Well, and I wanted to, I know there were some questions regarding allergies, and I wanted to just mention two things before we move on, which I forgot to mention. A lot of people will ask, are peanuts more allergenic than tree nuts? And no, they are pretty much the same. We just think of peanuts more because you have more kids eating peanuts, especially with peanut butter. But if you look at the percentages, it's very similar. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, about 9% of people will outgrow their nut allergy, which seems low, although I can tell you in the case of my daughter, we had her, she's 16 now, was diagnosed at 5. When she was around, I don't know, 10 or 11, we had her retested. And now she can pretty much consume everything but pecans and walnuts. She had a reaction to pecans, and they said, we're not even going to retest for walnuts because we're pretty sure that's not going to go well either, since it's, I mentioned it's from the same plant family. But those two are the main, and then the others she seemed to have grown out of because she was fine. So that can happen. But again, I always tell people, if you know someone or you get questions about, well, should I try them? I would only do it in a doctor's office or an allergist's office. So anyway, just wanted to make sure I didn't forget to mention those two items. So now I want to talk a little bit about our resources, and that hopefully will be helpful to all of you and your clients and customers. Here we go. So two of our most frequently asked questions, was Sally answered a little bit. What is the best way to store tree nuts? So our recommendation is to store them in an airtight container in a dark cupboard or a refrigerator for up to 6 months, in a freezer up to a year. I would not put pistachios in the shell in the freezer because you're going to have condensation, but you could do the shelled pistachios in the freezer for a year. I personally keep my nuts in there way longer, but this is our recommendation we give to people, because then they're going to end up with fresh nuts if you follow this guideline. And then what is the recommended serving size for tree nuts? Well, I mentioned earlier, the FDA qualified health claim recommends eating 1.5 ounces or 1/3 cup of nuts per day. So that's what we recommend because we want to make it consistent across the board. You may recall in the UCLA weight study, they used 1.5 ounces of nuts looking at weight loss and weight maintenance. So now here's the thing. Does anyone know what 1.5 ounces is, much less 1/3 of a cup? Most people do not. So this, most of you may have received this already. This is our most popular consumer piece. It's a poster showing what 1.5 ounces of each nut looks like. So we did this because this way people can see what the various nuts look like. And we always get questions, for example, hazelnuts, the same thing as filberts. And a lot of times we get questions, are these filberts? Same thing as hazelnuts. And when you look at this, people can actually count out, okay, if you want a 1.5 ounce serving of nuts, that's 32 to 36 almonds or 21 to 26 cashews. So this is a great way to talk about portion size. I know that I've been talking about the research and the fact that people eat nuts and they don't gain weight. Well, to a certain point, we always say it's a handful, not a canful. You still have to watch what you're eating. And so this is perfect talking to someone about portion size. This is available on our website. People can download it. If you are interested in getting hard copies for your stores or to hand out, if you're doing a food demo or something, I'm more than happy to send you hard copies. You can just let me know. So now I want to talk a little bit about our new website. Our website had not been updated for 10 years, and we just launched it in February, which was perfect timing because like now we're all online, everyone's trying to get their information online. So we really tried to update it to have a lot of good information, both for professionals and consumers, and to just make it kind of a fun, colorful site. We've got over 700 research abstracts on the website, over 100 recipes, and over 50 different nut facts. So I want to just kind of highlight certain areas of the website. In the research area, it's broken down into 12 areas of research. So everything from allergy to cognitive health to reproductive health. So if you click on any one of these squares, it will take you to an overview, a referenced overview on that topic, and then a link, as you see on the bottom here, view all abstracts, and you can see all the abstracts in that category. But you can also search by nuts. So if you just want to see what almond research is out there, or macadamia or cashew, you can do that as well. And then this is one of my favorite parts of the website. So each nut has its own nut fact page. So here's an example of hazelnuts, and they all look similar. So if you go to the hazelnut fact page and you scroll down, you're going to see an overview. Now this is where I know it gets a little confusing. We're pushing 1.5 ounces. That's what the FDA health claim is. That's what we're promoting in all of our materials. But we decided, because we were talking about a serving, and as I'm sure all of you know, the rack serving for nuts on the label is 1 ounce. We decided we better put 1 ounce here so people aren't confused when they're looking at their packages at home. So this gives you a brief overview on highlighting some of the major nutritional attributes for that particular nut. And then if you scroll down, we have the nutrition facts panel. We have a history for each of the nuts, where they grown, where they come from. For the US nut groups, we have a link to their member page. So in this case, you could link to Oregon hazelnuts. And then we have quick links to, in this case, hazelnut research abstracts, hazelnut recipes. Then I also wanted to point out, on each of the fact pages, you'll see we have, they're just PDFs, charts showing the tree nut flavonoid and phytosterol content. And then we have it broken down, the nutrients at percent daily value for 1 ounce, 100 grams, and 1.5 ounces of tree nuts. And those you can just download from the website. And then for 5 of the nuts, we have these fun recipe videos. This is showing the hazelnut, and we've got a walnut one that we're going to play right now, just so you can get a feel for it. So these are just kind of fun. And I think these recipes are short. So these are recipes you could even demo in your stores too. But I think they're fun for consumers. So another section we have on the site, of course, is our recipe section. So this you can search by nut, by course, and by season. So we have a lot of great recipes here. Now, all of these recipes are single nut. We actually get them from the individual nut boards. They share their recipes with us. We are working right now to put together, Sally's going to be helping us with this, mixed nut recipes and photos that we can do on the site as well. But as Sally has been showing throughout this webinar, you can certainly mix and match, you can replace, you can use more than one nut in most of these recipes. So this is a fun area, again, both for professionals and for consumers. And then we also have our blog section. This is what we were talking about earlier. This is the section that Sally writes for us. So we've got numerous blogs having to do with nuts and wine pairing, celebrating with flavorful nuts. And then if you scroll through it, if you go to the page, you'll find blogs for Easter, for Christmas, New Year's, all different things. There's one on nut butters if you want more information on different nut butters. So again, this is helpful for both professionals and consumers. So now I want to show a little bit about our social media. In the last year and a half, we've really tried to beef up our social media because, again, everyone's online. You can actually link to our social media from our website, which again is nuthealth.org. And from there, you can access Pinterest, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And this is just an example of some of the posts we've had in the last year. We really try and highlight different recipes, fun recipes and photos. And then if there's new research that has come out, we'll highlight the study and link back to the abstract on our website as well. So this, again, is just a fun way to give people ideas on how to include nuts every day in their diet. So I know I kind of ran through that part a little quickly, but if you have questions, feel free to contact me. My email address is maureen.turnis@nuthealth.org, or you can reach me at the phone number listed there. And I think Sally and I are more than happy to answer questions now.
That would be great, Maureen. Thank you. Let me just jump in. I've gotten a couple that have come on the chat that I wanted to ask you about. Someone wants to know if you could just clarify, is the 1.5 ounce recommendation based on a 2,000 calorie a day diet?
No. Well, we actually went to FDA when we wanted to do the health claim and said, can we get a health claim for nuts and heart disease for 1 ounce? And FDA came back and said, we feel the research shows that 1.5 ounces is more effective. So that's where that amount came from, the 1.5 ounces.
Okay. So it doesn't have anything to do with the number of calories?
No, no.
Good. Okay. And a second question, you mentioned in one of the sections on the different topics on nut health, there's something, a section on cognitive health and nuts. Can you just speak to that very generally and overall, sort of where the research is and what the thinking is on that topic that is so fascinating in so many ways to a lot of people, but just basically cognitive health and nut consumption?
Well, so this is one of our new areas. We haven't done a lot on it. This is why the MIND study is so exciting to be part of this very large NIH funded study with cognition. But we've also, the individual boards have done a bit of research. There's not a lot, but preliminary research has shown that nuts do seem to help reduce the risk for cognitive decline. We still need a lot more research, but that's one of the more newer areas, if you will, that we're looking at.
So ongoing research.
Yeah.
In that area.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Sally, anything else that you would like to say to the group, or?
Oh gosh.
A lot of nice compliments on your recipes. People have had a lot of great things to say about your recipes. So thank you for those.
Oh, no, you're welcome. I just encourage people to, so one thing I do, when I go out and do my demonstrations at Disney or, at culinary schools is to trust your instincts. So many people get scared, oh, I can't substitute that for that, or I think food is a lot more, and particularly nuts, they're a lot more giving. And I recommend people, if they don't give up a recipe because it's got walnuts and you prefer pecans, just substitute it and really experiment. There are so many ways you can, adding nuts to your omelette, and if you're having a chicken, butterflying it open and stuffing it full of nuts and herbs and then baking it. I mean, there's just so many ways you can incorporate the health of nuts into recipes. And there's one of the chefs that I work with. I mean, I think he loves nuts almost as much as I do, because every time I turn around, they're in a salad, they're on top of the fish, they're in a sauce or a salsa. And I think, nuts have so much to offer. So I just encourage people to give it a go, to get more experimental.
I don't know if any of you get the question, but I'm always asked, is it okay to have roasted nuts, oil roasted nuts? And people don't realize nuts are so high in fat to begin with, they actually absorb very little oil. So we always recommend, just from a nutrition standpoint, if you prefer oil roasted, fine, eat the oil roasted. The nutritional content is not going to be much different than, say, a dry roasted. And to Sally's point, which she said earlier, a lot of people say, well, should we have salted nuts, unsalted? Again, even the salted nuts are usually lightly salted, but you have the option, so you can go either way.
Maureen, what about coconuts?
Pardon?
What about coconuts?
Oh,
They're on
good
tree,
question.
so are they tree nuts?
So coconuts are not a tree nut. They're actually a fruit, but FDA has recently included coconuts as a tree nut for the allergy issue. So they've lumped coconuts in with tree nuts, but they're not really a nut. They're botanically a fruit.
Yes, most of us knew that, but that's a good reminder there. So, any other questions? Anything else? If anybody has any other comments, and can put them in the chat, or anything else as we wrap up. Maureen, I do thank you. I think your resources are terrific, and we've gotten a lot of comments, people saying that this is terrific information to have, and to be able to pass on to shoppers and other consumers and so forth. So thank you for that. Anything else coming up that you mentioned this ongoing research and this new research? Is this is sort of what you'll be working on, I guess, in the coming months, years? This is sort of the new research that we can look for would be on primarily on allergies. Is there anything else that we need to know about?
So, well, the NERS study that I mentioned with looking with the MIND diet in stroke patients, we also have an ongoing study right now at Vanderbilt looking at the effect of nuts on metabolic syndrome in millennials, which we haven't done anything with that group before, and there's very little that's been done. So we decided to look at millennials because they're the ones that are purchasing foods for the family, and we thought that would be a good group to target. So that study is underway, and we should have results from that hopefully in 2022. But I should mention, we were supposed to in 2020 have a Nuts 2020 similar to what we did at UC Davis, pulling together researchers from around the world. And because of COVID, we had to delay it. And then we just found out this morning from the organizers, we're actually going to do it in October of 2022, fingers crossed, because it's something you have to do in person. It's more like a round table where you have these researchers around the table. It's not open to the public or to the media, and just a few representatives from each of the nut boards is there as, like the dietary guidelines behind the ropes. You're just there to listen. But I think that'll be helpful too, because they'll give us an update on their thoughts on where we are with the research, where the gaps are, and where we need to look moving forward.
Okay.
So,
a few more questions as we close it up here. What are the best nuts for low carb and keto eaters?
You know what? Well, your Brazil nuts are going to be a little bit higher, and your cashews with carbs. but most of the nuts are very low in carbohydrates, and they're all good sources of protein. So I think you can choose your favorite, honestly.
Can I add something here? Because that brought up a point that I was going to mention earlier is, people that are, look at glycemic index and the rate of absorption of sugars, is that if you're eating, for example, a sweetened yogurt in the morning, or, say my potato pancakes, which things that are, and white rice, things that are absorbed, the sugars absorb very quickly. If you add nuts to that, it will slow down the absorption of those sugars. So it's a worthwhile thing for particularly people with diabetes and people working with people with diabetes, can keep in hand, because it will lower the glycemic index of any food that you're eating.
Well, that's true. And that's what, the University of Toronto, David Jenkins there is kind of the guru of the glycemic index. He's the one that did our diabetes study, and he's been a big nut promoter, really for that reason.
Maureen, are there any resources for farm issues concerning growing nuts, such as water usage and things like that?
I would recommend, who's done a lot in this area, because unfortunately they've been highlighted, is the Almond Board of California. They've done a lot on that area. So you could even go to their website. You can get it through our website, nuthealth.org, or we're trying to remember, this is embarrassing. I think it's just californiaalmonds.org. I might be wrong on that, but if you go to our website and you go to the nut fact page, or even on the homepage, if you scroll down, you can click on their website and then access, because they've done a lot in this area. Because as I say, being in California, almonds were kind of held up as the example of, and it was not completely accurate, but as an example of a crop that uses a lot of water. So I would check out their website.
Okay, and two more quick questions. One is, does INC also represent oils, nut oils, as well as the tree nuts themselves?
We don't. We only represent the actual nuts. But I don't know, it'll be interesting to see down the road, because you do see more and more nut oils on the market. It hasn't been a big market in the past. So it's a good question. We don't now, but that's not to say we wouldn't down the road.
Okay. And final question, is there an increase either in reality or perception in the number of tree nut allergies today versus, say, 25 years ago?
Well, there's an increase in food allergies, period. And as part of that, I think tree nuts have gone up as well. But when I say that, I was saying earlier, when you look at peanuts versus tree nuts, I guess they're both going up at the same amount, because they're both the same. When you look at the percentage of people allergic to peanuts versus tree nuts, it's the same.
Very good. Well, thank you both. Sally, thank you so much for this terrific presentation in the kitchen. And Maureen, your information is wonderful as always. So thank you for bringing it to Shopping for Health and sharing it with this group. And I also want to mention two other activities that Shopping for Health has going right now. We have two newsletters in distribution. One is regarding canned beans, and the other is on North Carolina sweet potatoes. And both of those are out. They're new, they're in circulation right now, and they're on the website, shoppingforhealth.org. All of this information from today's webinar, including Maureen's presentation and Sally's recipes, and this recording will be posted to shoppingforhealth.org within the next week or two. So thank you again. With that,
thank you,
Maureen. Thank you, Sally, and many thanks to the International Tree Nut Council Nutrition Research and Education Foundation for this sponsorship. See you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.